It was a typical Tuesday morning at the downtown courthouse, and the waiting area was packed with people. Lawyers in sharp suits whispered to their clients, shuffling through thick folders of papers. The air conditioning barely worked and everyone looked tired and anxious, waiting for their cases to be called. Inside courtroom 4B, Judge Patricia Henderson sat behind her massive wooden bench, looking down at everyone with that stern expression she'd perfected over her 20 years as a judge. She was known around the courthouse as someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. Fair but tough, the kind of judge who could make experienced lawyers nervous with just a look. The morning had been dragging on. Case after case, the usual stuff. Traffic violations, small disputes, people arguing over money they owed each other. Judge Henderson was getting impatient, tapping her pen against her desk as the court clerk shuffled papers. Case number 2847, the clerk called out in a bored voice. Thompson versus Daniel Chen. The plaintiff's lawyer stood up immediately. A man named Richard, who wore an expensive Navy suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He walked to his table with confidence, the kind that comes from winning too many easy cases. Then the courtroom door opened, and a teenager walked in. He couldn't have been more than 19 years old, wearing a plain gray hoodie, faded jeans with a small tear at the knee, and white sneakers that had seen better days. He had a worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder, the kind college students carry to class. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd just rolled out of bed. Judge Henderson's eyes narrowed immediately. She watched as the young man walked down the aisle, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. He looked around nervously at all the suited lawyers, then made his way to the defendant's table and sat down alone. The judge leaned forward, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the courtroom. "Are you Daniel Chen?" The teenager stood up quickly, maybe too quickly, showing his nerves. "Yes, Your Honor, that's me. And where exactly is your attorney?" Judge Henderson asked, glancing around the courtroom as if expecting someone to appear. "I don't have one, Your Honor," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the obvious tension. "I'm representing myself today." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the courtroom. A few lawyers smirked and exchanged knowing glances. Even the court reporter looked up with raised eyebrows. Judge Henderson removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose as if she suddenly had a headache. "Mr. Chen, do you have any idea how serious this is? You're being sued for $15,000. This isn't small claims court. This isn't traffic court. This is real money, real consequences." "I understand, Your Honor," Daniel said quietly, still standing. "Do you?" The judge's tone turned sharp, almost sarcastic. "Let me guess. You watched a few legal videos online? Maybe binge-watched some courtroom dramas? Thought you could waltz in here and play lawyer for the day?" More chuckles from the gallery. Richard, the plaintiff's lawyer, was grinning openly now, barely trying to hide his amusement. This was going to be easier than he thought. Daniel's face flushed slightly, but he kept his composure. "Your Honor, I assure you I take this very seriously. I'm prepared to present my defense." "Oh, you're prepared," Judge Henderson repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. She turned to the court clerk. "Make a note in the record that the defendant declined legal representation and chose to represent himself despite the court's concerns." She looked back at Daniel, shaking her head slowly. "Mr. Chen, I've been doing this job for 2 decades. I've seen dozens, maybe hundreds of people who thought they could handle their own legal matters. You know what happens. They lose, they make mistakes. They don't understand procedure. They don't know the rules. And they end up paying the price. I understand the risk, Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice growing quieter. "This is exactly what's wrong with kids today," Judge Henderson continued, apparently on a roll now. "Everything's on YouTube, everything's on Google, so everyone thinks they're an expert. You probably think law is just about talking a good game, being persuasive, right? Well, let me tell you something. Real law is complicated. It's technical. It takes years of education and experience." She gestured toward Richard. "That man over there went to law school for 3 years. He passed one of the hardest exams in the country. He's been practicing for over 15 years. And you think you can just show up in a hoodie and match him?" The courtroom was dead silent now. Some people looked uncomfortable with how harsh the judge was being. Others seemed to be enjoying the show. Daniel just stood there, his backpack still on the chair beside him, his hands clasped in front of him. "May I speak, Your Honor?" Judge Henderson waved her hand dismissively. Save it for your defense, if you can even call it that. I'm going to tell you right now, Mr. Chen. This court's time is valuable. The taxpayers of this city pay for every minute we spend in this room, so I will not tolerate any amateur theatrics. No emotional appeals. No rambling speeches you memorized from television. You will follow proper courtroom procedure, or I will shut you down immediately. Do you understand me? Yes, Your Honor, I understand. Good. She turned to Richard. Counsel, you may proceed with your opening statement. Let's get this over with. Richard stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a satisfied smile. He shot a quick glance at Daniel, that look of pity mixed with triumph. This case was already won, and it hadn't even started yet. Daniel sat back down slowly, unzipping his backpack and pulling out a thick binder. Around him, people whispered and pointed, the kid in the hoodie going up against a real lawyer. Some felt sorry for him. Others thought he was an idiot for not getting help. But if anyone had looked closely at Daniel's face in that moment, they might have noticed something interesting. Despite everything that just happened, despite being humiliated in front of a crowded courtroom, there was the slightest hint of a calm smile at the corner of his mouth, like he knew something nobody else did. Richard stood up with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he'd already won. He straightened his tie, grabbed a remote control from his briefcase and clicked a button. A screen lowered from the ceiling, and suddenly the courtroom was looking at blown-up photographs of what looked like a disaster zone. Your Honor, Richard began, his voice smooth and practiced. What you're about to see is the aftermath of Mr. Chen's occupancy at my client's property. A property that was in pristine condition when he moved in, and absolutely destroyed when he moved out. He clicked through the photos one by one. Holes in the walls, broken cabinet doors hanging off their hinges, carpet stains that looked like someone had spilled an entire bottle of red wine, cracked tiles in the bathroom, a kitchen sink that was literally hanging loose from the counter. My client, Mr. Thompson, is a hard-working landlord who owns 3 rental properties in this city. He's never had problems before. Never. But then Mr. Chen moved in, and within 6 months, $15,000 worth of damage. Richard paused for effect, letting that number sink in. $15,000. Judge Henderson was looking at the photos with a frown, shaking her head slowly. A few people in the gallery gasped at some of the worse images. We have documentation of everything, Richard continued, walking back to his table and picking up a stack of papers. Repair estimates from 3 different contractors. All of them came back with numbers between $14,000 and $16,000. My client tried to resolve this reasonably. He reached out to Mr. Chen multiple times, asking him to pay for the damages. But Mr. Chen refused to take any responsibility whatsoever. Richard turned and pointed directly at Daniel, who was sitting quietly at his table. This young man thought he could trash someone's property and just walk away. Well, Your Honor, that's not how the world works. My client is requesting the full $15,000 plus court costs and legal fees. He clicked through a few more photos, really driving the point home. Look at this kitchen. Look at these walls. This isn't normal wear and tear. This is negligence. This is destruction. And Mr. Thompson shouldn't have to pay for someone else's irresponsible behavior. With that, Richard sat down, looking extremely pleased with himself. He leaned back in his chair and whispered something to his client, who nodded and smiled. Judge Henderson turned to Daniel. Her expression said it all. She looked at him like he was already guilty, like this was just a formality before she ordered him to pay up. Mr. Chen, she said with a sigh, your turn. Though I have to say, I don't know what you could possibly say to explain those photographs. Daniel stood up slowly. He reached into his backpack and pulled out that thick binder everyone had noticed earlier. But he also pulled out something else. A small projector, the portable kind that students use for presentations. Your Honor, may I set this up? He asked politely. Judge Henderson looked surprised but waved her hand. Go ahead, though I hope you're not wasting our time with some slideshow you made last night. Daniel didn't respond to the jab. He just calmly set up the projector, connected it to his phone, and suddenly his own images appeared on the screen. The courtroom got quiet, people leaning forward to see what he was about to show them. Your Honor, Daniel began, and his voice was different now. Still respectful, still calm, but there was something else there. Confidence, knowledge. I'd like to start by referencing the Illinois Landlord and Tenant Act, specifically Section 5-12-110, which requires landlords to provide a detailed move-in inspection report with photographic evidence of the property's condition. A few lawyers in the gallery sat up straighter. That was the exact citation. Word for word. Richard's smile faltered just a little. Daniel clicked to his first photo. It was the same kitchen from Richard's presentation, but this photo was clearly older. The metadata showed a date from 8 months ago. This is a photograph I took on the day I moved in, June 15th of last year. As you can see, the cabinet door is already hanging loose. That damage was pre-existing. He clicked to the next photo, the bathroom with the cracked tiles. June 15th, same day. These tiles were already cracked when I arrived. In fact, I reported this to Mr. Thompson via text message on my second day there. He pulled up a screenshot of text messages, zoomed in so everyone could read them clearly. As you can see here, I wrote, "Hey, just wanted to let you know the bathroom tiles near the shower are cracked. Want me to avoid using that area?" And Mr. Thompson responded, "Yeah, I know about those, been meaning to fix them. Just be careful." Judge Henderson leaned forward now, squinting at the screen. Her expression was changing. Daniel continued, methodically going through each piece of damage. The holes in the walls? Already there. He had photos. The carpet stains? He pointed out how in his move-in photos, you could see faint outlines of the same stains, just not as prominent because they'd been poorly cleaned before he arrived. Furthermore, Your Honor, I'd like to cite the case of Johnson versus Lakeside Properties, decided by this very court 3 years ago. In that case, it was established that landlords cannot charge tenants for damages that existed prior to occupancy, even if those damages worsened during the tenancy. More lawyers were paying attention now. Some were pulling out their phones, probably looking up the case to verify it was real. Richard stood up quickly. Your Honor, I object. The plaintiff's photos clearly show. Objection noted but overruled. Judge Henderson interrupted, but she wasn't looking at Richard. She was staring at Daniel with a completely different expression now. Confusion mixed with something else. Respect, interest? Continue, Mr. Chen. Daniel pulled out more evidence. A detailed timeline of every maintenance request he'd made, all documented in writing. Copies of emails where Mr. Thompson acknowledged problems with the property. He even had a video walkthrough of the apartment from his move-in day, time-stamped and everything. I'd also like to point out, Daniel said, flipping through his binder, that the lease agreement Mr. Thompson provided contains several clauses that violate Illinois state law. Specifically, the provision attempting to waive my rights under the Security Deposit Return Act is unenforceable under Section 5-12-080. The courtroom was dead silent now. This wasn't some kid who watched legal videos on YouTube. This was someone who actually knew what he was talking about. The precise citations, the proper objection procedures, the way he presented evidence, it was all textbook perfect. Richard was no longer smiling. He was frantically whispering to his client, who looked increasingly worried. Judge Henderson removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she looked back at Daniel, there was no more mockery in her expression. No more condescension, just pure curiosity and maybe a hint of embarrassment. Mr. Chen, she said slowly, where exactly did you learn all of this? Daniel looked up from his binder, and for the first time since entering the courtroom he smiled. Not smugly, not arrogantly, just a small, knowing smile. I'll be happy to explain that, Your Honor. But first, I have 3 more pieces of evidence I'd like to present, and then I'd like to call a witness. Judge Henderson blinked. You have a witness? Yes, Your Honor. My former neighbor who lived in the unit next door and can testify about the condition of my apartment both before and after my tenancy. She's available via video call if the court permits. For the first time in probably years, Judge Patricia Henderson was speechless. She just nodded and gestured for Daniel to continue. In the back of the courtroom, people were whispering excitedly. This wasn't going at all how anyone expected. Judge Henderson called for a 15-minute recess. The courtroom erupted in chatter the moment she stood up. Lawyers were whispering to each other, pointing at Daniel, clearly confused about what they'd just witnessed. Richard was hunched over his table with his client, both of them looking worried and flipping through papers frantically. Daniel calmly packed his binder back into his backpack and pulled out a water bottle. He took a sip, completely unbothered by all the attention he was getting. Mr. Chen, Judge Henderson's voice cut through the noise. Could you approach the bench, please? The courtroom went quiet again. Everyone watched as Daniel walked up to the judge's bench. She leaned down so they could talk more privately, though in the silent room a few people nearby could still hear. "Off the record," Judge Henderson said quietly, her tone completely different from before. No more sarcasm, no more condescension, just genuine curiosity. "How does a 19-year-old kid know this much about Illinois landlord-tenant law? And I mean really know it, not just stuff you looked up last night." Daniel looked up at her, and for a moment he seemed to consider how much to say. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he took out a card and handed it to the judge. Judge Henderson looked at it, her eyes going wide. She looked at the card, then at Daniel, then back at the card. "This is a bar card," she said slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. An attorney bar card. From the state of Illinois." "Yes, Your Honor." She flipped it over, checking the back as if expecting it to be fake. But it wasn't. It was completely legitimate, with his photo, his bar number, everything. "You're a licensed attorney?" "I am, Your Honor. Passed the bar exam 2 months ago." Judge Henderson just stared at him for a long moment. "You're 19 years old?" "Yes, Your Honor. I finished high school early. Started college at 15, finished at 17. Got into Northwestern Law School and graduated this past May. Took the bar in July." The judge set the card down on her bench and rubbed her temples. She looked like she had a massive headache. "So this entire time while I was lecturing you about not knowing anything about law, mocking you about YouTube videos and courtroom dramas, you were actually a licensed attorney?" Daniel shifted his weight slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you correct me? Would you have believed me?" Daniel asked gently. "If I'd walked in here and announced I was an attorney wearing this hoodie, looking like this at my age, would anyone have taken me seriously? Or would they have assumed I was lying?" Judge Henderson opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Because he was right. She wouldn't have believed him. She would have probably made it worse, accused him of contempt for lying to the court or something. "I wanted to see if the legal system would work fairly," Daniel continued. "If justice would happen based on facts and evidence, or if it only works for people who look a certain way. People who wear the right clothes. People who are the right age." The judge looked down at her hands. For someone who'd spent 20 years commanding courtrooms, she suddenly seemed very small. "I owe you an apology." "You do, Your Honor. But I'd prefer you gave it on the record in front of everyone. The same way the disrespect happened in front of everyone." Judge Henderson nodded slowly. "That's fair." She picked up his bar card and handed it back to him. "Why are you representing yourself anyway? Why not just hire someone from your firm?" "I don't have a firm yet," Daniel admitted. "I've been interviewing, but most places see my age and find reasons not to hire me. And this case is personal. Mr. Thompson tried to scam me out of money I don't have. My security deposit was $1,200. He kept all of it and then demanded $15,000 more for damage I didn't cause. I'm a law school graduate with student loans and no job. I couldn't afford to hire someone, and I wasn't about to let him win by default." "Does he know?" The plaintiff's lawyer, "Does he know who you really are?" "Not yet," Daniel said with a slight smile. "But he's about to." Judge Henderson almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she just shook her head in disbelief. "Go sit down, Counselor Chen. We'll resume in 10 minutes and I'll address this properly." Daniel walked back to his table. As he did, every eye in the courtroom followed him. The whispers started up again, louder this time. A few lawyers who'd been laughing at him earlier now looked pale and embarrassed. One older attorney in the back, a woman who'd been practicing for decades, leaned over to her colleague. "Did you see that?" The judge called him counselor. "Something's happening here." Richard noticed it too. He stood up and approached Daniel's table, his confidence from earlier completely gone. "Hey, can we talk for a second?" Daniel looked up from his notes. "Sure. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. I'm sure we can work something out. My client is willing to negotiate. Maybe we drop the claim, you don't pursue anything further, we all just walk away. Why would I agree to that?" Daniel asked calmly. "Because litigation is expensive and time-consuming, and honestly, it's not worth either of our time." Daniel smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Mr. Dalton, I have evidence that your client has filed similar fraudulent claims against 3 other former tenants in the past 2 years. I have copies of those cases. I tracked them down through public records. Same pattern every time. Keep the security deposit, claim massive damages, count on tenants being too poor or too intimidated to fight back." Richard's face went white. "You can't prove that's a pattern. Actually, I can, and I intend to, because this isn't just about my $15,000 anymore. This is about your client running a scam, and you either knowing about it or being too careless to check. Before Richard could respond, the bailiff called out, "All rise." Judge Henderson walked back in, and this time when she looked at Daniel, there was no contempt in her eyes. If anything, she looked embarrassed. She sat down and took a deep breath. "Before we continue with this hearing," she began, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "I need to address something. I made some assumptions today that were completely inappropriate and unprofessional. I judged Mr. Chen based on his appearance and his age, and I was wrong to do so." People in the gallery leaned forward, sensing something big was coming. Mr. Chen is not some kid playing lawyer. He is a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois, a graduate of Northwestern Law School and a member of the bar in good standing. She paused, letting that sink in. He has presented his case today with more skill and preparation than many attorneys I see in this courtroom on a regular basis. You could hear a pin drop. I allowed my biases to cloud my judgment, and I spoke to him in a manner that was demeaning and disrespectful. That's not who I want to be as a judge, and it's not how this courtroom should operate. She looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Chen, I apologize to you publicly and sincerely for my conduct. It was beneath the dignity of this court." Daniel stood up. "Apology accepted, Your Honor. Thank you." Several lawyers in the back were already pulling out their phones, probably texting their colleagues about what was happening. This story would be all over the courthouse by lunch. Judge Henderson straightened her papers. "Now then, shall we continue with your defense, Counselor Chen?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call my witness now." "Proceed." As Daniel set up the video call on his laptop, Richard slumped in his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear. This case that seemed so easy an hour ago had just turned into a complete disaster, and it was about to get even worse for him. Daniel's laptop screen lit up, and a woman's face appeared. She looked to be in her mid-50s, sitting in what appeared to be a home office with bookshelves behind her. She smiled warmly when she saw Daniel. "Good morning, Your Honor," she said, her voice coming through clearly. "My name is Patricia Morgan. I'm ready to testify." Judge Henderson nodded. "Ms. Morgan, please raise your right hand." After administering the oath remotely, she gestured for Daniel to proceed. "Your witness, Counselor." Daniel stood, holding a small notepad. "Ms. Morgan, can you tell the court how you know me?" "I was your neighbor for the 6 months you lived at Riverside Apartments. I lived in Unit 2B, right next door to your Unit 2A. And did you have occasion to see my apartment during my tenancy?" "Oh, yes, many times. We became friendly. You'd help me carry groceries sometimes, and I'd bring over cookies I'd baked. You invited me in several times for tea." Daniel pulled up a photo on his laptop, sharing it to the courtroom screen. "Ms. Morgan, I'm showing you a photograph of my kitchen. Can you tell me when this was taken?" She squinted at the screen. "That's from the day you moved in. I remember because I came over to welcome you to the building and you were unpacking boxes. I specifically remember commenting on those broken cabinet doors because I told you that my apartment had the same problem when I moved in." "The cabinets were already broken when I moved in?" "Absolutely, Mr. Thompson is a slumlord, plain and simple. He never fixes anything unless you threaten to call the city inspectors." Richard jumped up. "Objection." "Your Honor, the witness is making inflammatory statements about my client's character." "Your Honor," Daniel said calmly, "I'm establishing a pattern of neglect that's relevant to the case." "I'll allow it," Judge Henderson said. "But Ms. Morgan, please stick to facts you personally observed." "Of course, Your Honor, I apologize." Patricia Morgan straightened in her chair. "What I can say is that during the time Daniel lived there, I never once saw or heard anything that would suggest he was damaging the property. No parties, no loud noises, nothing unusual. He was the quietest, most respectful tenant I've ever lived next to." Daniel nodded. "And what about the condition of the apartment when I moved out? I helped you clean on your last day. That apartment was spotless. We scrubbed everything. The only damage was the same damage that was there when you moved in. I even took some photos myself because I told you that Mr. Thompson would probably try to pull something. He did the same thing to the tenant before you." "Objection," Richard shouted. "Hearsay." "Sustained," Judge Henderson said, but she was writing notes furiously. Daniel pulled up another document. "Ms. Morgan, I'm showing you a copy of a complaint filed with the City Housing Authority. Do you recognize this?" "Yes, that's my complaint. I filed it 4 months ago about the condition of the building. Mold in the hallways, broken locks, pest problems. The city came out and cited Mr. Thompson for 12 violations. Daniel turned to Judge Henderson. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this housing authority report as evidence. It shows a pattern of neglect that predates and extends beyond my tenancy. Admitted, the judge said. Richard was frantically scribbling notes, whispering urgently with Mr. Thompson, who was now sweating visibly. Thank you, Ms. Morgan, Daniel said. No further questions. Richard stood up for cross-examination, loosening his tie slightly. Ms. Morgan, you said you and Mr. Chen were friendly, correct? Yes. Good friends, even? I'd say friendly neighbors. We weren't best friends, but we got along nicely. So you'd want to help him, wouldn't you? You'd want him to win this case? Patricia Morgan's expression hardened. Young man, I'm 62 years old. I'm a retired paralegal with 30 years of experience. I know the difference between helping a friend and committing perjury. Everything I've said today is the absolute truth, whether it helps Daniel or not. A few people in the gallery actually laughed quietly. Richard's face turned red. No further questions, he muttered, sitting down. Daniel thanked Ms. Morgan and her video screen went dark. Then he turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I have one more piece of evidence that I believe will be of significant interest to the court. He pulled out a folder from his backpack. I took the liberty of researching my landlord's litigation history. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Thompson has filed 7 similar cases against former tenants. 7. All claiming damages between $12,000 and $18,000. All against tenants who were young, low income, or students. People who couldn't afford to fight back. He walked the folder up to the judge. In 5 of those 7 cases, the tenants defaulted because they couldn't afford lawyers. 1 case was settled for a fraction of the claimed amount. And 1 case is still pending. I've included copies of all the court filings. Judge Henderson opened the folder, her frown deepening as she read. The courtroom was completely silent. Furthermore, Daniel continued, I contacted 2 of those former tenants. They agreed to provide statements. Both described the exact same situation I experienced. Pre-existing damage, false claims, intimidation. One of them was a single mother who ended up having her wages garnished for damage she never caused. Mr. Thompson stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. This kid destroyed my property and now he's trying to destroy my reputation. Mr. Thompson, Judge Henderson said coldly, sit down and be quiet or I'll hold you in contempt. He sat down, but his face was purple with rage. Daniel pulled out one more document. Your Honor, I'd also like to point out that according to city property records, Mr. Thompson purchased these apartments in a foreclosure sale 5 years ago. The inspection report from that sale, which is public record, notes significant existing damage to multiple units, including broken cabinets, cracked tiles, and worn carpets. The same damage he's now trying to blame on me. Richard looked like he might be sick. Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to confer with my client. Denied, Judge Henderson said flatly. She was reading through the documents Daniel had provided, and her expression was getting darker by the second. I've seen enough. Mr. Chen, do you have anything else to present? Just one thing, Your Honor. I'd like to request that the court not only dismiss this case but also award me my security deposit of $1,200, which Mr. Thompson wrongfully withheld, plus court costs and my time spent preparing this defense. And what about attorney's fees? The judge asked. You are an attorney, after all. Daniel smiled slightly. I'll waive those, Your Honor. This was personal, not professional. Judge Henderson closed the folder and looked directly at Mr. Thompson and Richard. I'm ready to rule. She didn't even need time to deliberate. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed in its entirety. Furthermore, I'm ordering Mr. Thompson to return Mr. Chen's full security deposit of $1,200, plus court costs of $850, within 30 days. Mr. Thompson shot to his feet again. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And Mr. Thompson, I'm also referring this matter to the state attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud. What I've seen here today suggests a pattern of predatory behavior that warrants criminal investigation. The courtroom erupted. People were talking, lawyers were pulling out their phones, the court reporter was typing frantically. Richard grabbed his briefcase. Your Honor, we intend to appeal this decision. That's your right, Judge Henderson said, but I'm confident this ruling will stand. And Counselor, if I were you, I'd seriously reconsider my client list. This case has your name on it too. Richard went pale. He grabbed Mr. Thompson by the arm and practically dragged him toward the exit. Mr. Thompson was shouting something about unfair treatment, but nobody was listening. Daniel quietly packed his things back into his backpack. Several lawyers approached him, handing him business cards, asking if he'd found a job yet. Judge Henderson watched it all from her bench, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. Justice, real justice, had been served, and she'd learned a lesson she wouldn't forget. The courtroom slowly emptied out, lawyers filing out in groups, still talking excitedly about what they'd just witnessed. Daniel was gathering his things when Judge Henderson's voice stopped him. "Mr. Chen, could you stay for a moment? I'd like to speak with you in my chambers." Daniel looked up, slightly surprised, but nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." He followed her through a door behind the bench, down a short hallway, and into her office. It was exactly what you'd expect from a judge who'd been on the bench for 20 years. Law books lined the walls, framed degrees and certificates, a mahogany desk covered with case files. Judge Henderson gestured to a chair. "Please sit." She sat down across from him, and suddenly she didn't look like the intimidating judge from the courtroom. She just looked like a tired woman who'd made a mistake and knew it. "I want to apologize again," she started. "Not the official apology I gave in court. A real one. Person to person." Daniel set his backpack down. "You already apologized, Your Honor." "I know, but I need you to understand something." She leaned back in her chair. "I've been doing this job for 2 decades. I pride myself on being fair, on treating everyone equally. But today I failed at that. I judged you the moment you walked in that door. I saw a teenager in a hoodie and I made assumptions. Wrong assumptions." "It happens," Daniel said quietly. "It shouldn't," she replied firmly. "Not in a courtroom. Not from a judge." "Do you know why I was so harsh with you?" Daniel shook his head. "Because I've seen too many young people come in unprepared, thinking they can wing it, and then they lose everything. Their money, their homes, their futures. I thought I was doing you a favor by being tough, by warning you what you were up against." She laughed bitterly. "But you didn't need my warnings. You were more prepared than most attorneys I see." "I had to be," Daniel said. "When you look like me, when you're my age, people don't give you the benefit of the doubt. So I have to be twice as prepared, twice as careful, twice as good." Every single time, Judge Henderson winced. "That's not fair." "No, it's not. But it's reality." Daniel's voice wasn't angry, just matter of fact. "I wore the hoodie on purpose today. I wanted to see what would happen if I looked like a regular teenager, instead of trying to dress up and play the part of an attorney. And honestly, Your Honor, it went exactly how I expected it would." "That's a pretty cynical view for someone so young." "Maybe, or maybe it's just realistic." Daniel paused. "But you know what surprised me? When you actually apologized. Most people just double down when they realize they were wrong. They make excuses. They blame someone else. You didn't do that. You owned it. That meant something." Judge Henderson was quiet for a moment. Then she opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a business card. "I want to give you something. Well, not give, offer." She slid the card across the desk. "That's the number for Janet Rodriguez. She runs one of the best civil rights law firms in the state. They specialize in tenant rights, consumer protection, discrimination cases. Exactly the kind of work you're clearly passionate about." Daniel picked up the card, studying it. "I'm going to call her this afternoon and tell her about you." Judge Henderson continued. "Not just about today, but about what I saw. Your preparation, your skill, your composure under pressure. And yes, I'll tell her how I misjudged you. Because that experience, that perspective you have, that makes you exactly the kind of attorney her clients need. Your Honor, I appreciate that, but no buts. I'm not doing this because I feel guilty, though I do. I'm doing this because you're talented. And talent like yours shouldn't be wasted just because law firms can't see past your age." She leaned forward. "Besides, after what happened today, you're going to be famous around here. Someone recorded the hearing on their phone. By tonight, it'll be all over social media. Every lawyer in the city will know your name." Daniel's eyes widened. "Someone recorded it. It's a public courtroom. They're allowed." She smiled slightly. "Consider it free advertising. Though I imagine my part in it won't paint me in the best light. You apologized. You made it right. That's what people will remember." Judge Henderson hoped he was right. "So will you call Janet?" Daniel looked at the card again, then nodded. "Yeah, I will. Thank you, Your Honor. Call me Judge Henderson, or just Patricia since we're not in court." She stood up, extending her hand. "And Daniel? Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to prove yourself over and over again. What you did today, that was remarkable. You're already good enough. Don't forget that. They shook hands and Daniel felt something shift. Maybe this was what it felt like when someone actually saw you for who you were, not who they assumed you to be. 3 weeks later, Daniel walked into the offices of Rodriguez and Associates for his first day of work. Janet Rodriguez herself met him at the door, a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Judge Henderson couldn't stop talking about you," she said, leading him through the office. Said you were one of the most prepared attorneys she'd seen in years. Coming from her, that's high praise. Daniel's first case at the firm was exactly what he'd hoped for, a group of tenants being exploited by a landlord who was using the same tactics Mr. Thompson had used. The same threats, the same fraudulent damage claims, the same targeting of vulnerable people who couldn't fight back. But now they had Daniel fighting for them. 6 months after that day in court, Daniel was sitting in a coffee shop when he got a text message. It was from Judge Henderson. The message included a link to a news article. The headline read, "Landlord faces criminal charges in tenant fraud case." Below it was Mr. Thompson's photo. The state attorney's office had investigated, just like Judge Henderson promised. They'd found evidence of fraud spanning 5 years, involving over 20 tenants. He was facing multiple felony charges. Judge Henderson's text was simple. "Justice takes time, but it comes. Proud of you." Daniel smiled and sent back a simple, "Thank you for everything." He thought about that day in the courtroom sometimes, about how close he'd come to just paying the money, to letting Mr. Thompson win because fighting back seemed impossible, about how many other people had been in his position and hadn't fought back, because they didn't have the knowledge or resources or courage. That's why he kept doing this work. Every case, every client, every time he walked into a courtroom, he was fighting for the people who looked like he did that day. Young, underestimated, dismissed before they even got a chance to speak. The viral video of the hearing had gotten over 5 million views. People commented about the importance of not judging by appearances, about standing up for yourself, about how the legal system should work for everyone, not just those who looked the part. But Daniel's favorite comment was from a teenager who wrote, "I'm 17 and want to be a lawyer. I thought I was too young, that nobody would take me seriously. But this guy proved it's possible. Thank you for showing us we can do it too." That comment was worth more than any victory in court, because Daniel Chen hadn't just won a case that day. He'd shown people that intelligence doesn't have an age requirement, that justice doesn't care what you're wearing, that the best attorneys aren't always the ones with the fanciest suits and the biggest offices. Sometimes they're the ones who show up in hoodies, carrying backpacks, ready to fight for what's right no matter how many people doubt them. And Judge Patricia Henderson never forgot the lesson either. Every time a young person entered her courtroom, she remembered the teenager she'd dismissed. She remembered how wrong she'd been. And she made sure to look past appearances, past age, past assumptions, and focus on what really mattered. The truth. The evidence. The person standing before her, whoever they were. That's what justice was supposed to be. And one teenager in a hoodie had reminded her of that in a way she'd never forget.